Let me tell you something about buying a house that nobody warns you about at the closing table. They tell you about the interest rate. They tell you about the inspection. They tell you about the roof and the furnace and whether the basement has ever taken on water. What they don't tell you is that the biggest threat to your peace of mind might be living right next door, wearing khaki shorts and carrying a clipboard. But I'm getting ahead of myself. 3 years ago, I started looking for a house. Not just any house. I had a list, same as everybody does. 3 bedrooms, a garage that could fit an actual car and not just 17 boxes of Christmas decorations. A yard big enough for my dog to run without clotheslining herself on the neighbor's fence. Normal stuff. But at the very top of that list, underlined twice and circled in red ink like it owed me money, were 4 words. No homeowners association. Period. I'd heard the stories. Everybody has. The guy who got fined $200 because his mailbox was the wrong shade of black. The woman who had to tear out her vegetable garden because the HOA board decided tomatoes were not in keeping with the community aesthetic. The retired Marine who put up a flagpole in his own yard and received a 14-page violation letter before the concrete was dry. I didn't want any part of that world. I wanted to buy a home and then, here's the radical concept, actually own it. So I did my homework. I'm talking deep homework. I didn't just ask the realtor if there was an HOA. I pulled the deed records myself. I checked the plat maps at the county recorder's office. I read every line of the title commitment, which, if you've never done that, is about as fun as reading the terms and conditions for a toaster. But I did it anyway. I had the title company confirm in writing that no covenants, conditions, or restrictions ran with the land. No association fees. No architectural review board. No busybody committee with the power to tell me what color I could paint my own front door. And I found it. A little 3-bedroom ranch on a half-acre lot at the edge of a quiet road. The neighborhood to the east was a planned community. One of those places with a stone entrance sign and matching mailboxes and a pool nobody ever seemed to use. But my lot was outside of it. Legally, officially, on paper, and in every way that mattered, I was not part of their world. The day I closed on that house, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt free. I know that sounds dramatic for a guy holding a set of house keys in a title company lobby, but that's the truth of it. I had a place that was mine. No landlord, no board of directors, no covenant telling me my trash cans had to be stored in an approved enclosure. Just me and my dog and a half-acre of grass that I could let grow to whatever height I pleased. I moved in on a Saturday in April, spent the whole weekend unpacking boxes and grilling on the back patio and waving at the occasional neighbor who walked by. Everyone seemed friendly enough. The folks in the planned community kept to their side. I kept to mine. The property line was clear, marked by a row of old cedar trees that had been there longer than any of us. For about 6 weeks, it was exactly what I'd dreamed of. Then one Tuesday afternoon, I walked out to my mailbox and found an envelope with no stamp. Just my address, handwritten, and a return address I didn't recognize. Inside was a single-page letter on official-looking letterhead informing me that I was in violation of 3 separate community guidelines and that my annual dues of $475 were past due. I read it twice. Then I laughed. That was my first mistake. Not because the letter was serious, it wasn't, but because I assumed that reasonable people would behave reasonably when I pointed out the truth. They were not reasonable people. It started with a letter. Not a knock on the door, not a friendly wave from across the property line, not even a passive-aggressive note tucked under a windshield wiper. A letter. Crisp white envelope. Return address printed in that particular font HOA boards seemed to pull from the same catalog of institutional smugness. Greenfield Commons Homeowners Association. Like they were a government. Like they had jurisdiction over anything beyond their own manicured little kingdom. The letter informed the homeowner, let's call her Dana, because that's what the neighbors called her, that she was in violation of 3 separate community standards. Her fence was 4 inches too tall. Her mailbox was the wrong shade of black, and she had failed to submit an architectural review request before installing a raised garden bed in her own backyard. Dana read the letter twice. Then she laughed. Then she stopped laughing because she realized they were serious. See, Dana's property was not in Greenfield Commons. She knew this because she had spent 4 months making absolutely certain of it before she ever signed a single closing document. Her title was clean. Her deed referenced a completely separate plat. Her property sat adjacent to the HOA community, but was legally, definitively, unambiguously outside of it. She had confirmed this with her title company, her real estate attorney, and the county recorder's office. She had done the homework. She had done it twice. None of that mattered to the Greenfield Commons board. What Dana didn't know yet, what she would learn over the following weeks in the most exhausting way possible, was that this letter was not a mistake. It was a strategy. The boundary confusion game is one of the oldest plays in the HOA Overreach Handbook, and it works like this. First, they send you official-looking correspondence that assumes authority they do not have. The language is deliberate. They don't say, "We believe your property may fall within our jurisdiction." They say, "Your property at 412 Ridgeline Drive is subject to the covenants, conditions, and restrictions of Greenfield Commons." They state it as fact. They cite bylaw numbers. They reference CC and Rs with specific section headings. They give you a deadline to respond. The entire presentation is designed to make you feel like you've already lost an argument you didn't know you were having. Second, they count on you not knowing the difference between a plat map and a napkin sketch. Most people don't. Most people see an official letter from an organization with the word association in its name and assume someone with authority reviewed the situation before sending it. That assumption is the foundation the whole game is built on. Third, and this is the part that makes it genuinely dangerous, they start creating a paper trail that positions them as the reasonable party. Every letter they send you becomes a record of their attempts to communicate. Every deadline you ignore because you know they have no authority becomes, in their narrative, evidence of your non-compliance. They are building a story in which you are the difficult neighbor, the one who refuses to cooperate, the one who is degrading property values and community standards through sheer stubbornness. Dana sent back a polite letter of her own. She explained that her property was not part of Greenfield Commons. She included a copy of her deed. She wished them well. 2 weeks later, she received a second letter. This one informed her that failure to remit the outstanding assessment of $640 within 30 days would result in the matter being referred to the association's legal counsel. She called her real estate attorney. He reviewed her documents and confirmed what she already knew. She was not in their HOA. She did not owe them money. Their letters had no legal weight whatsoever. He also told her something she hadn't considered. He said keep every single piece of paper they send you, every envelope, every postmark, because people like this don't stop at letters. He was right about that. The first time it happened, I was walking my dog. That's it. That's the whole crime. Biscuit needed his evening constitutional, and I was giving it to him, along the same dirt path that runs behind my back fence line, the one that cuts through the drainage easement between my property and the Willowbrook subdivision. I'd walked that path maybe 200 times since moving in. Never once had anyone said a word about it, but somebody had been watching. Somebody had been waiting for exactly this moment, and I think they'd been waiting for a while. I was maybe 40 yards from my own back gate when a woman I'd never seen before stepped out from behind the community mailbox kiosk on the Willowbrook side and pointed her phone at me, loud enough that the microphone would catch it clearly. "You are trespassing on Willowbrook Estates private property. This is your notice. I am calling the police." Now I want you to sit with that for a second, because the drainage easement is not Willowbrook property. It belongs to the county. I knew that because I'd read my survey. I'd read the plat map. I'd even called the county planning office 2 months earlier when the HOA first started sending me letters, just to make sure I understood exactly where my land ended and theirs began. The easement was public. It was not theirs, and even if it had been, I was standing closer to my own fence than to anything with a Willowbrook address on it. But none of that mattered to the woman with the phone. She had her script, and she was sticking to it. I said something like, "Ma'am, this is a county easement. I'm not on your property." She didn't respond to that. She just repeated her line, almost word for word like she'd rehearsed it. "You are trespassing on Willowbrook Estates private property. The police have been contacted. Biscuit sat down and looked at me like even he knew this was ridiculous. I walked home. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I went inside and I wrote down the time, the date, what she was wearing, and exactly what she said. I pulled up the county GIS map on my laptop and screenshotted the easement boundaries. Then I sat on my couch and waited. Because I had a feeling the evening wasn't over. It wasn't. About 40 minutes later, a patrol car pulled into my driveway. 2 officers. Polite enough, but they had a purpose. Someone had called in a trespassing complaint. They said a resident of Willowbrook Estates had reported an unknown male walking through their community and refusing to leave when confronted. That's not what happened, but that's what the report said. Unknown male, refusing to leave, trespassing. They asked me if I'd been in the Willowbrook neighborhood that evening. I told them I'd been walking my dog along the county drainage easement behind my own house. They asked if I had any identification. I showed them my license. They asked if I lived here. I said, yes, I own this house. It is not part of Willowbrook, and I was not on Willowbrook property. One of the officers nodded slowly. The other one was writing something down. They weren't hostile, they weren't aggressive, but they were there, on my porch, because someone had picked up a phone and told a story about me that wasn't true, and the system had responded exactly the way that person wanted it to. They left after about 10 minutes. No citation, no arrest. Just a record somewhere that a complaint had been made and a contact had occurred. Just my name attached to the word trespassing in some database I'd never see. That was the first time. It was not the last. And that's when I understood what was really happening. This wasn't a misunderstanding about property lines. This was a setup, methodical, rehearsed, and designed to build a paper trail against me, one false report at a time. So I decided to build one of my own. The first time you see the cruiser pull up, your stomach drops. Doesn't matter that you haven't done anything wrong. Doesn't matter that you're standing in your own kitchen making coffee or sitting on your own porch reading a book. When a police car rolls slow up your driveway and 2 officers step out with that particular walk they have, that deliberate, unhurried authority walk, your body reacts before your brain catches up. Your hands get cold. Your mouth goes dry. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a voice says, what did I do, even though you already know the answer is nothing? They'll be polite about it, usually. That's almost worse, because polite means they've already been told a story, and the story has a shape. And right now, you're the shape of the problem in that story. Someone called, someone from the HOA next door. Though they won't say that right away, they'll say they received a complaint. They'll say there's been a report of trespassing. They'll ask if you live here, which is a question that should make you angry, but instead just makes you feel small, standing on property you own, proving you belong somewhere you already belong. Here's what you need to understand about this moment. The officers standing in front of you are working with exactly one side of the story. The HOA called them. The HOA told them a version of events. Maybe the board president used his calm, reasonable voice, the one he practices for meetings. Maybe he referenced the community boundaries in a way that sounded official. Maybe he said something like, we've had ongoing issues with this individual, which is technically true if you count the issues being entirely manufactured by his side. The officers don't know any of that yet. They just know they got a call and they're doing their job. So the first thing you do is breathe. I know how that sounds. But you breathe because the next 10 minutes matter more than you think. And how you handle them determines whether this stays a nuisance or becomes a nightmare. You stay calm. You speak clearly. You do not raise your voice. You do not say anything about the HOA being corrupt or crazy or out to get you even. Though all of those things might be true, because right now you are being evaluated and anything that sounds emotional gets filed under difficult in an officer's mind. You ask specifically what you are being accused of. You ask who made the complaint. You have a right to know both of these things. You listen to the answers carefully, and you remember them because you are going to write them down the second this interaction ends. If you've been following the advice from earlier chapters, you have your deed accessible. You have your survey. You have documentation that shows exactly where your property begins and ends. You offer to show these to the officers, not aggressively, not like you're trying to prove them wrong, but like you're helping them understand a situation someone else has misrepresented. You are giving them the other side. You are correcting the record. You do not consent to any search of your property. You do not invite them inside. You are cooperative, but you are not surrendering rights you don't need to surrender. You get their names. You get their badge numbers. You note the time and the date and the exact words used in the complaint as they describe it to you. You ask if a report will be filed and you request the report number. And then, after they leave, after the cruiser backs out and disappears down the road and your heart is still hammering, you sit down and you write every single detail while it's fresh. Every word, every look, every claim made by the HOA that the officers repeated to you. Because here's what the HOA doesn't understand about sending police to your door. Every visit is evidence. Every false complaint is documentation. Every time they use law enforcement as their personal enforcement arm, they are building your case for you. They think they're intimidating you. What they're actually doing is handing you ammunition. Now here's where the story turns. Because up until this point, everything has been happening to you. The letters, the boundary games, the trespassing accusation, the police at your door. You have been the one reacting, the one explaining, the one standing in your own yard with your heart hammering while somebody in a uniform asks you to account for your presence on land you pay taxes on. That stops now. Let me tell you something that most people never learn until they are already neck deep in a dispute like this. Your rights in this situation are not ambiguous. They are not gray areas. They are not subject to interpretation by a retired dentist who happens to chair a homeowners association board. Your rights are specific, documented, and enforceable, and the sooner you understand them, the sooner the entire dynamic shifts. First and most fundamental, if your deed does not contain an HOA encumbrance, if you never signed their covenants, conditions, and restrictions, if your property does not fall within the recorded plat, then that association has exactly zero legal authority over you. None. Not a little. Not some soft implied authority because your mailbox is the same color as theirs or because you share a fence line. Zero. That is not my opinion. That is property law in every single state in this country, and I want you to sit with that for a moment because it matters. When someone sends you a letter demanding dues, when someone tells you your lawn does not meet community standards, when someone calls the police and says you are trespassing in their neighborhood, they are not exercising authority, they are performing it. There is a difference and the law knows it even if they do not. Second thing, when police respond to a complaint like the one filed against you, they are responding to a report. They are not making a legal determination about property boundaries. They are not surveyors. They are not title attorneys. They showed up because someone picked up a phone and told them a story. Your job in that moment is not to win an argument on your front porch. Your job is to stay calm, identify yourself, and provide the facts that correct the record. You ask what you are being accused of. You ask who made the complaint. You provide your name and your address. If you have your deed or your survey accessible, you offer to show it. You do not consent to a search of your property. You do not volunteer information beyond what is necessary. You get the responding officer's name and badge number. You are polite, you are clear, you are brief. And then after they leave, you file your own report. You document the interaction. You write down the time, the date, what was said, who said it. Because what just happened to you was not a misunderstanding. Someone filed a report that they knew or should have known was false. And that is not a neighborhood squabble. That is a crime. Filing a false police report is a criminal offense in every state. If the person who called knew you were on your own property and called anyway, they have potentially committed that offense. Depending on what they said to officers or to other neighbors, you may also be looking at defamation. If this becomes a pattern, and with HOA boards it almost always becomes a pattern, you are building a case for civil harassment. But none of that matters if you do not know it. And that is exactly what they are counting on. The entire strategy depends on you not knowing your rights, not understanding the legal landscape, not realizing that the power they are projecting is hollow. They are counting on you to feel small and confused and outnumbered, and to eventually just comply because it seems easier than fighting. So here is what you do instead. You learn the terrain. You understand what they can and cannot do. You recognize that the law is not neutral in this situation. The law is actually specifically on your side. And then you start building. The day after the officers left my porch for the second time, I sat down at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold before I ever touched it. I just sat there staring at the wall, thinking about how many times I was going to have to prove I belonged in my own home before somebody with authority actually believed me. And that's when something shifted. Not anger exactly. Something quieter than anger, something more useful. I decided I was going to build a case so airtight that the next person who knocked on my door, whether they carried a badge or a clipboard or a certified letter, would walk away with absolutely nothing to say. I started with a deed. I already had a copy from closing, but I went down to the county recorder's office and pulled a certified copy. Fresh stamp, fresh date, official as it gets. I asked the clerk to also pull the plat map for my parcel and the adjacent HOA subdivision. She printed both, and I laid them side by side on the counter right there in the office. You could see it plain as day. My lot sat outside the subdivision boundary like a tooth that never grew into the row. Separate parcel number, separate legal description. No reference anywhere to covenants, conditions, or restrictions tied to Meadow Glen Estates. I had her certify copies of everything. Cost me $11. Best $11 I ever spent. Next, I called my title insurance company. Took about 20 minutes on hold, which I used to start a spreadsheet. When the representative finally picked up, I explained the situation. She pulled my policy, confirmed there were no HOA encumbrances on my title, and said something that stuck with me. She said if anyone was asserting jurisdiction over my property that didn't exist in the chain of title, that was exactly the kind of cloud on title that my policy was designed to address. She opened a file, gave me a claim number, told me to send everything I had. So I did. I sent copies of every letter Donna Ridley and the Meadow Glen board had mailed me. I had 7 by that point. 7 letters in 4 months, each one more insistent than the last, each one referencing C, and R's I never signed for a community I never joined. I scanned every envelope, every postmark, every page. I organized them by date in a folder on my computer and a matching physical folder in a filing cabinet I bought specifically for this purpose. Then I called a licensed surveyor. His name was Gerald, and he had a voice like gravel in a coffee can, and he did not care one bit about neighborhood politics. He came out on a Thursday, spent 3 hours with his equipment, and drove steel pins into the ground at every corner of my lot. He produced a 20-page survey report with coordinates, measurements, and a boundary map that would hold up in any courtroom in the state. $750. I wrote the check without flinching. I installed 2 security cameras, one facing the front yard and the street, one covering the side of my property that bordered the HOA common area. Motion activated, cloud storage, timestamps on every frame. I wasn't trying to catch anyone doing anything dramatic. I just wanted a record. An unbroken, undeniable, time-stamped record of who came onto my property and when. I started a log. Every interaction, every phone call, every time I saw Donna or any board member near my property line. Date, time, what was said, who was present. I wrote it down within the hour every single time. My handwriting got neater as the weeks went on. Like the act of documenting was teaching me a patience I didn't know I had. People think the paper trail is boring. People think it's the part of the story you skip to get to the good stuff. But I'm telling you, sitting here now on the other side of all of it, the paper trail was the good stuff. Every page was a brick, and I was building something nobody was going to knock down. Now here's where the story turns, and I need you to understand something. Before we go any further, everything up to this point was defense. Everything from this point forward is offense. And there is a difference between being aggressive and being strategic. What I am about to describe is strategic. The cease and desist letter went out on a Tuesday. My attorney, a woman named Patricia Devlin, who had handled property disputes for 22 years in this county, drafted it with the kind of language that sounds polite on the surface, but carries the weight of a freight train underneath. It named the HOA board president by name. It named the property manager by name. It named the specific resident who had called the police on me twice. It cited the surveyor's report. It cited the deed. It cited the title insurance policy. And then it cited the state statute on filing false police reports, which in our state is a Class A misdemeanor, carrying up to a year in county jail and a fine of up to $4,000. That letter cost me $350. Best money I ever spent in my life. But Patricia told me something I will never forget. She said a cease and desist letter is not a legal document. It has no binding power. It is a shot across the bow. What it does is establish on the record that you told them to stop, that you identified the specific behaviors, and that you put them on notice of the legal consequences. So if they keep going, and Patricia said people like this almost always keep going, you have built the foundation for everything that comes next. She was right. They kept going. 2 weeks after the letter arrived, the HOA sent me a formal demand for 18 months of back dues, totaling $4,650. They sent it certified mail. To pay within 30 days would result in a lien being placed on my property. Now, let me tell you what that felt like. That felt like someone reaching into my chest and squeezing. Because a lien on your property is not a joke. A lien affects your ability to sell. A lien affects your credit. A lien is a real thing with real consequences. And these people were threatening to place one on a property they had absolutely zero legal claim to. Patricia filed two things simultaneously. The first was a formal complaint with the state regulatory board that oversees homeowner associations. In our state, that board has the authority to investigate complaints of overreach, improper governance, and fraudulent collection practices. The complaint was 14 pages long and included every single document I had been collecting for months. Every letter, every photograph, every police report, every timestamp, from every security camera clip, the surveyor's report, the deed, the title policy, all of it. The second thing she filed was a civil lawsuit. Not a big dramatic thing, a straightforward action for harassment, tortious interference with property rights, and abuse of process. She also included a count for attempted fraudulent lien, which in our state carries the possibility of treble damages. That means if a court finds that someone tried to place a lien on your property, knowing they had no legal right to do so, you can recover 3 times your actual damages. I asked Patricia what she thought our chances were. She said she had rarely seen a case this clean. She said most of the time there is some ambiguity, some gray area, where the property line is unclear or the covenant language is vague. She said in my case there was none. My property was not in their plat. My deed carried no encumbrance. Their CC and ours did not reference my parcel. The survey confirmed it. The title company confirmed it. The county records confirmed it. She looked at me across her desk and said, something I think about often. She said the problem with people who are used to having power is that they never expect someone to actually use the system against them. They count on you being tired. They count on you being scared. They count on you giving in. I was tired. I was scared. But I was not giving in. There comes a morning after all of it when you wake up and the first thing you think about is not the HOA. It might be coffee. It might be that weird noise your car started making. It might be absolutely nothing at all. Just the ceiling fan turning slow above your bed and the light coming through the blinds. And you realize that somewhere in the last few weeks, the knot in your stomach untied itself, and you did not even notice when it happened. That is what winning feels like. Not a courtroom scene, not a slow clap from the neighbors, just a Tuesday where nobody knocks on your door with a clipboard and nobody calls the police because you had the audacity to exist on land you own. But I want to be honest with you about something. Standing your ground for good does not mean the story ends clean. It means you build a life where the clean ending is not something you need anymore. The cease and desist worked. The survey shut down the boundary nonsense. The attorney's letter made the HOA board suddenly discover they had better things to worry about than your fence height or your gravel driveway or whatever imaginary violation they had invented that week. Maybe the false report complaint went somewhere. Maybe it just sat in a file and made someone nervous enough to stop. Either way, the harassment dried up like a puddle in July. But here is the part nobody tells you. You still have to live next to these people. The board president still drives past your house on the way to the clubhouse. The neighbor who called the cops that day still checks her mail at the same time you check yours. The management company that sent those letters is still managing the community 30 yards from your property line. Nobody moves. Nobody disappears. You just have to find a way to exist in proximity to people who tried to make your life miserable and decided to stop, only because you made it expensive and inconvenient for them to continue. And that is fine. That is actually more than fine, because the goal was never to destroy anyone. The goal was to be left alone on property you bought and paid for. The goal was to have your deed respected and your rights acknowledged, and your Saturday mornings returned to you without the constant low hum of someone else's authority trying to creep across your property line. So you maintain what you built. You keep the binder, you keep the survey in a fireproof safe. You keep the security cameras running because they were a good idea anyway. You renew your relationship with your attorney every year or two, just to check in, hey, is anything new in the case law I should know about? You stay a member of whatever state or local property rights group you found during the worst of it. Not because you are paranoid, because you are prepared. And you learned the hard way that those two things look identical from the outside but feel completely different from the inside. If someone new moves in next door and asks about the HOA, you tell them the truth. You tell them to check their deed. You tell them to get a survey before they even unpack the kitchen boxes. You tell them that most HOAs are fine and most board members are just volunteers who care about their neighborhood, but that power without accountability is a weed that grows in every direction and does not stop until someone pulls it out by the root. You are not angry anymore. You are not even relieved, really. You are just a person who owns a house that is not in an HOA, living exactly the way you planned to live when you first found that listing and thought, yes, this is the one. The porch is yours. The yard is yours. The quiet is yours. Nobody is coming to take it.